There's a dopamine response when you do something really difficult intellectually. It's not just physical. We all talk about the fact that we should go jogging, go running, go learn something physical. And that's 100% true. Literally, go outside, go jog. But right now we're talking about your brain. When you do something hard with your mind, it does affect you emotionally. It changes how you feel about yourself that you've done something hard.
Welcome to Scholé Sisters, the podcast for the classical homeschooling mama who seeks to learn and grow while she's helping her children learn and grow. Scholé Sisters is a casual conversation about topics that matter to those of us in the trenches of classical homeschooling who yearn for something more than just checking boxes and getting it all done. I'm your host, Brandy Wenzel. You can find me over at afterthoughtsblog.net, spreading my Charlotte Mason joy through blog posts, study guides, audios, and more. My co-host today is Abby Wall. Abby is basically the queen of the Scholé Sisters Sistership. Abby is a country-living farmer, rancher, a loving wife, and mom of 5 who homeschools and reads whenever she can. Memory is an essential ingredient in our homeschools. We homeschool moms worry if we're doing it right, if we're doing enough, if it's going to work at all. Want to sort out your ideas about memory in education? Come to the Scholé Sisters Retreat, Homeschool Essentials, Memory. And rest assured that no matter how imperfect our efforts, they are all worthwhile. After the retreat day, which is basically a homeschool mom in-service, you will re-enter your homeschool with renewed vigor and vitality and vision. Go to scholésisters.com/memory to register. Our guest today is Karen Harris. Karen is married to Wes and is the homeschooling mother to 10 children. She and her family love to read, travel, and have adventures together. The author of A Happy Mother of Children, Disciplines of Happiness, Karen continues to write and learn from her home in Maryland. Karen and a friend have been on a mission to give themselves the classical education they never received, using Susan Wise Bauer's plan from her book, The Well-Educated Mind. Abby and I were so inspired by Karen's story of burnout and revival, and we can't wait to share it with you. And so, without further ado, let's get to it. Let's start off with our Scholé every day. And since Abby's a slacker and hasn't shown up, I will go ahead and start just because I never make a guest start us off for if you're a first-time guest because you haven't
Thank you.
So you're welcome. So my Scholé every day is something that I picked up. Renee Shepard, who's been on the show a couple of times, recommended this book to me. It was from one of her classes that she was taking for her master's degree, and it's called Progymnasmata, Greek Textbooks of Prose, Composition, and Rhetoric. And it says by George Kennedy. I guess he's the translator, really. This has been so helpful because I've tried different Progym curricula, and the early stages of it have been great. I haven't really taught the Progym all the way through. But I feel now like maybe I could. Now that I've read this, what's neat about it is it's not just one author. George Kennedy, has gone through and found the major, I can't remember if it's 3 or 4, but there's a few major textbooks. Oh, I guess there's 5. Okay. I'm looking at the table of contents now. So there's 5 major works in history that go through these different stages of how the ancient Greeks taught rhetoric, which we would consider to be kind of a writing curriculum. I think for them, it wasn't just writing because they were so big on orators. But I know that for most of us, we see it as a writing curriculum these days. Anyway, so there's all these different stages, and they actually place them even in different orders, which I find interesting. But he has gone through and translated all of them and put them all into one book so that you can figure out all the primary sources in one-stop shop. It's so nice. I have really, I don't know. I feel like I've had my eyes open because I think I overcomplicate the idea of writing. Like I feel like There must be some sort of fancy thing we're supposed to be doing with our kids. And actually, it feels so, the early stages at least, really do feel very down to earth and really do feel like, well, first we narrate and then we play around with it. I'm even envisioning how this could be done with, I don't have little kids anymore, but I do work with a school where, like, with our littler elementary school kids, once they learn to narrate, I think we could even do some of these things orally, just have them play around with, say, a fable from Aesop or a really short history reading in order to start developing rhetoric, even in those early years. So it's so strange because it's very technical sort of reading, but I would call it comforting because I feel like, okay, we're not really on the wrong track as much as I feared. So it's been really fun. I had no idea this book existed. I used to read little excerpts of Aphthonius and things on the BYU website. It was the only place I could find it back when I first discovered this idea of the Pro-Gym. So it's been nice to have it all in one place. Karen, what about you? What's your Scholé every day?
I know it's supposed to be one, but
why narrow it down?
So there's a reason. I am reading Confessions by Augustine. And I know that some people say that you should say Augustine, but apparently my kids hate it. They hate it when I say Augustine and they all get really mad. So I can't say Augustine. I have to say Augustine. So
our official position on the show is that we say it both ways in the same episode. So you're fine.
Oh, okay, good. Oh, good. Well, then I'm in good company. So I had tried to read Augustine a long time ago, and I found it completely unbearable and I couldn't read it. So I fast forward many years later, I tried to read it again. But at the same time, I was given a book called On the Road with St. Augustine by James K.A. Smith. And I had already read quite a few books by Smith, and I absolutely loved them. What he essentially does is takes the longings of the human heart that everybody feels, everything from the longing for your father, the longing of relationship with your mother, and then how do you become independent, the longing for what does it mean to this idea of being on a journey and how we always kind of feel out of sorts. And then he connects all those feelings and ideas to how we saw all of them in Confessions and in the life of St. Augustine. So all of a sudden, this book that was written by a man that you, in one sense, as you're reading, feel like you cannot connect with him at all. Smith opens up his life in such a way that you're reading Augustine and say, oh my gosh, you're speaking to my life. Hear me with the internet and lacrosse games and, relationships and your family and movies and TV. And all of a sudden, between Confessions, which is, there's other Augustine books, but between Confessions and the Smith book, it caused this synergy of, I don't know, really speaking to my heart about where I am in my life right now. I feel like anytime anyone talks about Augustine, I'm like, well, read him, but you should probably read the James K.A. Smith book at the same time, because it would just really, really help you to understand how right Augustine was about everything, really, almost. So that's what I'm reading right now.
It is amazing to read. I mean, I've never read the Confessions all the way through. I've just read excerpts, but it is amazing, I feel like, to read these sections and feel like, how was he 1600 years ago or whatever, maybe 17? Because it feels so, I know it's an English translation, so it's written in my tongue and all of that stuff, but just the ideas never die. And the struggle that humans had thousands of years ago are the same struggles we have now, the internal struggles. So it's just, I love it. So the Smith book, I have not read On the Road with St. Augustine, but I've read Smith before, and some of his books are, they have a lot of really large words. They feel very academic. Does this feel really academic, or is it more?
No, absolutely. No. It almost feels like it's not the same author.
Oh, wow.
At all. It feels very chatty. Almost. Really? Yes, it does.
I wasn't even sure he had it in him.
Well, no, neither would I. You get a hint of what he's capable of because he does all these references. So he makes so many cultural references in the book, everything from other books, movies, art, record. I did not just say records. Oh, my goodness.
I won't tell.
Okay. I couldn't. Yeah, I can't help myself. CDs, MP3. I don't know. What do people use? I don't know. Downloads.
I don't even know either.
Whatever they are. I don't know. Music. There we go. Music. References to music. So he makes so many cultural references that he is able to make connections to how our culture actually shows the longings of the human heart. He's not speaking Christianese, though it's there. So his book is actually one that I think could be used evangelistically. So you could go to a friend who's struggling and say, I have a book that you may enjoy reading, or could I read this book with you?
Yeah.
It really speaks to a person who's longing. And then even like, hey, can we watch this movie together and talk about it? And he is making all these references. I don't know if maybe the next step would be, do you want to read Confessions? Because I think for the average person, maybe that's a really big leap. But I think On the Road with St. Augustine would be a good start.
So do you think the two could be paired for, say, a high school homeschooler?
Absolutely, 100%. Yes.
Because what you're describing, I thought, I wonder if my oldest daughter would enjoy doing that. I've been wanting to do some Augustine with her, and I just haven't. She'll be a junior next year. So I've got 2 years with her. And I thought, I want to do that before she graduates.
I think it would be helpful if their mind is mature enough to start questioning. And I don't mean questioning the faith. Yeah. I just mean questioning life, period. You can see developmentally in a child when they go from the child mind and they start developing into the mind that starts looking around and they actually start thinking beyond themselves.
Yeah.
The child that's starting to think outside of themselves just a little bit, that is a time that you could do that. So I have high schoolers. I have 3 high schoolers this upcoming school year. Well, there's 2 of them that I think it would be appropriate and 1 that it would not because of where they are just in their, intellectually, they're just not ready yet.
I totally get that. Thank you for that.
Sure.
Okay. So Abby, why don't you do your Scholé every day?
This is Abby, and I just finished with my book club, and it was my choice, a reread of Peace Like a River. And then I just finished Susan Wise Bauer's A Medieval World. I did some of it reading and then some of it on audio. So it was really great. So I just finished 2 books on my 5x5 challenge, which was great.
Good job.
And it's been a while since I finished anything because I had a bunch of big things going, and that can be really discouraging.
Absolutely.
So it's so nice to actually finish a couple books. Peace Like a River, even though it is a modern novel, it is such a fun and a Western and just filled with delightful sentences and wonderful poetry about a cowboy named Sunny Sundown that a girl in the story writes about. And it is rhyming and beautiful and hilarious. It has a little bit of something for everyone if you have not read it yet. Have either of you read? Oh, okay. So I would say this is such a fun book. It has murder and it has escaping from the law. It has miracles. It has one of the most lovely descriptions of maybe what we see heaven as. It's almost like the Great Divorce in parts of it, or at the very end. Sacrifice, familial love, redemption. And it is just a beautifully moving story. And Leif Inger just delighted me. I would highly recommend it if you have not read it yet.
Could I read this aloud to my teenagers, or is it?
Yes.
Okay.
I would read it aloud to my teenagers. I mean, there's definitely some, you might want to read the first couple chapters just to see.
Okay.
Because there are some very bad characters and they are dark, but there's nothing graphic. There are people who get shot and killed and things like that. So
they love that kind of stuff. So
okay, great. They would probably love it. If you like true grit, this is probably right up your alley. It is a longer book. I love this. Everyone who came to the book club that I hosted, they just loved it. We had such a great conversation about it.
I needed a fun book to read.
It is a fun book. And if you get it on audio, the person who narrates is amazing as well, if you are an audiobook lover. So either way is great.
Okay. It's good to know.
Yes. Hi, Abby here to give you an inside look into the community we call the Sistership. It is the place for homeschooling moms to gather and engage in meaningful and fruitful conversation. If you've ever found yourself listening to the podcast and wanting to join the conversation, discuss the ideas presented, or ask a question, then join us inside Sistership. That is where we go in depth and extend the conversation to include all of you. We are passionate about reclaiming and pursuing our own education, and we know that real education happens best in community. Sistership is the place to find your sisters. We have a feature that allows you to search for people near you. We want homeschooling moms to connect locally, and Sistership is here to help. We are fond of saying that friends don't let friends read alone, and we have an active and engaged online community if people in your local area haven't joined yet. Together, we read widely, think deeply, and apply faithfully the educational philosophy and good and great books. So join today.
Okay, well, let's go ahead and transition to our topical discussion. So I was going to give a little background of how this episode happened. So
Sure.
I think it was Misty and we recorded with Susan Wise Bauer, and we talked about her book that lays out, what is it? That's The Well-Educated Mind. And it lays out this plan for reading. And she has information on 150 books, I think, in there under all these different reading lists, under all these different subjects. And it's basically, if you would like a classical education and you did not receive one, here is one way that you could go about giving it to yourself. On that show, we speculated, has anybody ever done this? And we asked Susan Wise Bauer, and she said, oh yeah, I've talked to people who have done this. And I mean, we were thinking like, maybe we should do this. And then we get this email from you where you say that you and your friend for, I think it's 5 years, right? Have been doing exactly that. And you're 5 years into it and you've done 50 books, and you also read other books at the same time.
We do.
Which is amazing. And this has been very transformative for you. You have 10 children. You've been homeschooling for over 20 years.
True.
Because I'll tell you, one of the big things that we get from people all the time is, how I have time. Children are so time consuming. But most of the people who are saying that do not actually have 10 children, Karen. So
True.
I kind of felt like, well, if you can do it, anybody can do it. So before we get into what you're doing now, I'd love for you to talk about kind of the before. I mean, tell us a little bit about yourself. And then also, why did you start this? Where were you at before you started doing all of this?
The very succinct Karen's bio for the moment is that my husband and I, we have 10 children that we have together. I have actually also 2 stepdaughters.
Oh, wow.
That we didn't raise. But as far as in the homeschool world, my husband and I had 9. And then we have another child that we are the guardians of whom are the guardians. And so I homeschool her also. I just finished my 22nd year homeschooling. Wow. And so it's been a very, very long, many, many decades and lots of learning to have homeschooled for that long.
Right.
4 of our children have graduated and are out in the world. I have 2 married sons and 1 daughter who still lives home, who's an adult. And then I have 6 children that are between the ages of 9 and 16 that I homeschool. The 1 elementary schooler, 2 in middle school, and then 3 high schoolers.
Wow.
That's how I spend my days. Now, as far as background before, and I want to give context for this, because normally when I talk about what I'm doing, it's almost not fair to talk about that I have 10 kids. Okay. And I'll tell you why, because it has this feel of, so we're going to hear about a mom who has a whole lot of kids, and then I'm going to start name dropping, right? Which I am going to do. I'm going to be name dropping a bunch of books that I've read over the past 5 years with Jill. And that sounds really good. And it almost sounds like this pie in the sky thing. And if you've either never read any of these books or you've even never heard of them, like I had not heard of almost any of these at one point, I don't want you to be discouraged. I don't want our listeners to be discouraged by that, because I want to give context for how I ended up there. So I am in my mid 40s. And so as a child, I read incessantly. That's what all I did for fun is I read and read and read. And one of my funniest memories, my mother still talks about it, is every time I would go to a slumber party, I would pack books. And my mother found out that I went to slumber parties and went over people's houses and then didn't play with the children.
I feel like we could be best friends.
I know. She would go through my stuff and she'd take my books out, which I thought was so rude, and wouldn't let me take books. So I didn't read a lot of classics, like true children's classics necessarily, but I did read all the books that the kids of my generation read.
Yeah.
So became a Christian when I was 11 and walked with the Lord. Now, my life ends up taking an extremely dramatic turn when I walked away from the Lord when I was 18
Wow.
Ended up having our first son out of wedlock when I was 20 years old. And I ended up getting married when I was 21 to an unsaved man. And then for the rest of my 20s, I lived an extremely, extremely difficult life. So my husband and I ended up having 4 children. We ended up having a horrific situation happen. We separated because of it. He ended up going to prison because he had committed a crime.
Wow.
And it was a felony offense. And he got a 6-year prison sentence. The Lord, for whatever reason, at the time that I didn't necessarily understand, called me to stay with him. And we give our testimony. It's online. If anybody wants to listen to it, it's on YouTube under the name A Happy Mother of Children. And we tell our entire story. But
I would love to put that in the show notes so people could look it up. That'd be great.
And that's the 2 of us giving this. So I'm not telling tales out of school here because this is the story that he and I have told together.
Yeah.
So then he ends up coming home after 3.5 years. And then I hit, at this point, I'm almost 30 years old. So throughout my 20s, I was living with a marriage that sounded like it was from some kind of really bad movie.
Yeah, really.
And we had 4 little kids. I homeschooled the entire time he was in prison. We had made this decision and I homeschooled all day and then I worked at night.
Wow.
It was extraordinarily difficult. And I read the easiest Janet Oak. I mean, I did read the entire time. So then Wes comes home from prison and we end up having 5 more children and we had them one a year. So we have 5 more children and my husband had always made music. And so he gets this idea because he actually got saved while he was in prison.
Aww.
So he comes home, we're trying to redo our marriage as believers and it's literally a disaster. And he ends up recording 2 CDs with the older 4 children. We ended up starting our own record label called I Believe in America Recordings. They record 2 CDs the group's called the Praise Warriors. And they actually sing scripture verses to hip hop tracks. So it's like 300 verses over the 2 CDs to hip hop tracks. And so the older 4 kids, we end up doing a little tiny bit of traveling. And so I spent my entire 30s, number one, trying to rebuild a marriage because my husband got saved at 37. And so it was rough going.
Yeah.
There's just no words for what happened. And then I had 4 kids I was homeschooling in the beginning, plus I had 5 babies.
Oh my
and
word.
I'm trying to do all the logistics for my husband's dream because he comes home and I'm being a good wife, right? Doing all these dreams.
Yep.
I end up crashing my way into 40. And I didn't read a book in my 30s. I don't even know if I don't think I even touched a book. So the girl who had read, I think one summer when I was in like middle school or something, I read like 100 books. And I mean, nothing but read books my entire life.
Oh.
And then I just couldn't. I couldn't read a book with nursing babies. I did nurse babies, I think I don't know, who knows? I nursed every one of those 9 babies. They always just pull the book out of your arms. I don't know. So
yeah.
I hit 40. I end up having a mini life crisis, like a midlife crisis. And I say, I don't even know who I am anymore. I don't know what to do with myself. God providentially, my girlfriend ends up having a book club and she uses John Piper's book, Think. I don't remember diddly squat about that book club. Okay. Nothing about the book, right? Except for in the book, he references the verse, Matthew 22:37, which is we're to love the Lord our God with all of our heart, soul, and all of our mind. And I thought, I don't think I'm doing that. I was given a mind, but I don't know how to intellectually love my God. I've used my mind practically to serve my family. And I think that at different seasons, it was right. And I don't have any regrets about any of it. I don't have any regrets about those 2 decades, right? I'm not saying that the sin in the beginning wasn't wrong. That's clear, right? So that's not the question. But Ecclesiastes says that, to everything, there's a season, right? So for those seasons of me using my mind to how to logistically homeschool children when I had all these babies in the house and how do we do meals and how do we sort of keep them clean, maybe? And how do I help my husband? And how do I do budgets for my husband's business when I hate this stuff? Okay. So I used my mind and that was unto the glory of God, but I wasn't there anymore.
Yeah.
And so now that I had more freedom and I was in a different season, I did feel a conviction before my God to say, okay, Karen, you have space now. I have a different margin now. And now what do I do? And I thought, I had no earthly idea, except I had 3 editions of The Well-Trained Mind. Didn't have all 4. I think there's 4. I have one less than you need, right? You're right. I'm missing one of them. Oh, I was always sad. I'm like, I wanted all of them. Every time she came out with the new one, I'm like, I want a new one. So I knew that throughout time, educated human beings read the classics. I don't even know what a classic is. I know I made my kids read books.
Yep.
I've been homeschooling for years at this point. I'm 40 years old, and I started homeschooling when I was in my late 20s, or 25 rather. 25. Wesley was 5 when I was 25. The first book I started with was the same book I gave to my son, Wesley, which is The Abolition of Man by C.S. Lewis. Now, I think that shouldn't have been a problem. C.S. Lewis wrote The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, right? That is a children's book. I mean, there's lions and there's dwarves and there's fuzzy things.
Yeah.
So this should not have been a problem. So I'm cooking dinner. And while I'm cooking dinner and, you're standing around in your kitchen waiting for stuff to bubble, and you can't leave because literally the split second I leave, stuff catches on fire.
Yeah,
so
seriously.
I have to stand in the kitchen and watch the stove. While I'm standing there, I'm trying to read The Abolition of Man. I got about 3 pages in and found out that I was an idiot. I don't know. I was actually stunned. So The Abolition of Man is written in English, except I have no earthly idea what he's talking about. So I left the kitchen, which I almost never do while I'm cooking, except those few times that I almost burned the house down, stomped off to the studio and said to my husband, Wes, I'm trying to read this book. I don't understand anything that I'm reading. And he said, well, do you need to Google any of the words? Like he says, get your phone. Like if you don't know a word, Google it. And then he said, hey, Karen, just keep reading. Just keep reading it. And I thought, okay. So I had this initial crisis of, okay, I'm going to start reading. But I found out that there was another level of reading, and I had never read like that before. It was scary. I was scared to find out that I didn't understand because I was afraid that I would never. What if I couldn't?
Yeah.
I was afraid of the fact that I didn't know any other women who were reading books like that. Not the women that I knew personally.
Yeah.
I remember standing in the kitchen and thinking, you know what, Lord, you said to love you with my mind. So I need to train my mind. And I think this is the way to do it. So I end up talking to a girlfriend of mine, and I start, I had looked up like 100 most important books of all time lists. I'm thinking I got to start somewhere. I need a list. I love lists, right? I'm a homeschool mom. I want to check stuff off because it makes me happy. Her girlfriend was standing there. Her name's Jill. She was listening to the conversation between Joe and me. And she says, Karen, haven't you ever heard of The Well-Educated Mind? And I said, yeah, it's that other book by Susan Wise Bauer. She's like, have you ever looked at it? And I said, no. She said, well, it's exactly what you're talking about. It has the list in there. It's all the lists. It's all the books. And I said, are you serious? That's how we ended up.
Wow.
That's how we started.
And your husband was supportive.
It's really funny to me. So he doesn't read. I mean, literally doesn't read at all. And he has not ever said a single solitary word to me about the whole book situation at the house. Nothing. He doesn't say anything about the piles. And now they are pretty piles. They're beautiful. You know how you make them pretty with the bigger ones?
Oh, yeah, totally.
The big bookshelf, this shelf downstairs, that's an entire wall. There's just books literally everywhere all over the house. The kids are reading books. There's books in the car. There's books in bathrooms. There's literally books all over the house. And he never says one word to me about it. And it's always like, Karen, go for it. He does have a heart to give me the freedom to go be me. I don't know how to put it, but
yeah,
I think I supported him and always have. And so he respects me and does the same. You know what I mean? There's a mutual respect for each other in that. So
that's a beautiful thing.
Absolutely.
Let's get into the practical parts. How do you make this happen? Even if you have a mini crisis, you do still have all this responsibility. And your kids might not be as young, but it's still a lot of people and stuff to manage. So how does this work for you logistically?
The first thing was we had to just decide on a list. I love the Susan Wise Bauer.
Okay.
One of the reasons why I loved her book was she breaks it down by genre. And she also gives in the beginning how to ask good questions about the books. So for each different genre, she almost does like a Mortimer Adler sort of how to read a book.
Yeah.
And she tells you how to read each type. Well, we don't know how, which is ironic because you're thinking, oh, I'm a homeschool mom, but I'm thinking I actually don't know how to read well. So she tells you how to read well. Part of the reason why I think you need to think outside of yourself and pick someone else's list, at least as a basis, which is what we did, is because you don't know what's good yet. You just don't.
Yeah.
In the beginning, you don't have enough education to know, to be able to make that determination. It's kind of like asking the 2-year-old to pick out a well-balanced dinner. Like you can't ask them. They're not the ones to ask. That was the start. Now, ironically enough, and this was funny to me, we decided we're going to start in novels because what are you going to do? Start in science? Like, no, gosh, like we'd never survive. So we start in novels. The first book is we read Don Quixote. Well, it's a 1,000 pages. Yes, it's 1,000 pages long. And we both start reading it and you're thinking, God help me, literally. Like, Jesus, I need help. I'm never going to survive this. And then we get all the way to the end. How do you delve into the deepness of this book? And then I decide I'm going to write a summary in this journal that I have. And my summary was, reading books will affect your life. That's all I got. That's what I got. I got that. I learned something. Thank you. I'm glad I read it.
Took 1,000 pages.
1,000 pages later, I learned a lesson. I'm being facetious because there is more to it than that. But in the beginning, that's kind of what you feel like.
Yeah.
But I met with Jill yesterday and I went through the list of these questions and I said, Jill, what are your thoughts on this? And I asked her. And so we kind of brainstormed. And one of the things was when we first started, we naively thought it would take us, I think we actually hadn't counted how many books were in the book list. We didn't realize it was almost 150. We thought it was going to take us about 5 years, which I thought is really cute now. Like, oh, isn't that cute? 5 years. That's funny. Okay, now we think maybe 20.
Wow.
It may actually be longer than that.
But aren't you glad you thought it was only 5 in the beginning?
That's a good point.
Probably,
because
yes.
Probably with the scope of it, thinking 20 years, that's a long time.
It is. And you didn't have any benefit yet.
Yes.
It was by faith. There was no benefit in the beginning. So from the very beginning, we were taking our time. We had this very long-term plan that we were just going to meet and we were going to be extremely flexible. There have been times that we met on a weekly basis because we could. We actually just could meet on a weekly basis.
Wow.
Sometimes in the summer, we can meet every week. But during this time period, Jill, for 3 of 4.5, almost 5 years, she took care of relatives that have since passed, like full-time caregiver.
Wow.
She can't meet. So then we would say, oh, we're meeting on Tuesday. And then we can't meet on Tuesday. We're like, fine, I'll see you next Tuesday. And then we can't meet next Tuesday. There have been times we met every month or every other month. So we would text each other and say, okay, well, we can't meet, but what are we reading?
Yeah.
And we would just fast forward the reading. We also have been very respectful about when we get together. We do blab about our lives because we are actually friends, but we are meeting to talk about the books. So we keep the woman chat part shorter and actually talk about the books, and we respect our time limits. She has a husband and I have a husband. And so when we say that we're getting together from 7 to 9, we actually mean 7 to 9 and we respect that. So 9 o'clock we roll, regardless of whether we're in the middle of talking or not. I'll see you because this is the long haul.
Yeah.
The conversation's never going to end anyway, right?
That is so true.
You could literally never shut up. So it's fine. So we just leave. And we both have that respect for each other. Having the flexibility to change it nonstop. And also, whatever our goals are, we just set goals and then we just don't meet them. We just don't. We got laughing. We're reading Thucydides. And we had this goal. We're going to be done Thucydides by the end of June. Well, we met last week and then we said, yeah, about Thucydides. And then we just both laughed and said, yeah, maybe we'll finish it this summer. And then we just started talking about something else. Having this realistic view of we are lifelong learners. We are not checking the boxes off here. And we're doing this together. We're made for community. And so the two of us doing it together. Logistically, the fact that we're very, very flexible, keeping to very specific time limits, keeping in communication with each other, that we're texting each other and saying, hey, what is the plan? That part has been probably the biggest practical way that it's been able to last 4.5, 5 years over some really significant life changes between the two of us that we've both had to deal with.
Do you think that one of the reasons why this works so well is because there's only two of you?
Yes.
I'm listening to some of the things you're saying about the flexibility, and I've led a local, it's just a Charlotte Mason reading group. It's not a everything reading group, but I've led it for, 10, 12 years. Now it is true that we are able to pick up where we left off, kind of no matter how long it's been since we last met. For example, with COVID, we got shut down for a year. And we still picked back up with the next chapter and did the next thing. But some of what you're saying about, we met every week and then we met, that many people managing, 7 to 10 people, I wouldn't be able to do that. Like, there's no way. I just have to set a date and time and hope that somebody shows up. So I'm wondering about this project with just a team of 2 people. It seems really efficient and effective that way.
For what we're doing, as far as us having kind of this long-term goal to go through all of the books in Susan Wise Bauer's list.
Yeah.
But if you were going to instead say, there's a group of women who all decided we're going to read, Leisure, the Basis of Culture together.
Yeah.
And we're going to do it within a 6-month period, and we're going to meet every week and discuss it. That's doing the same thing as far as we're going to read this book together. We're going to have time for discussion. Are there people who are not going to show up? Absolutely. But that gives a time limit. So that still addresses it. It fills that need.
Yeah.
But that's a different way of doing it. So you could essentially do a whole bunch of very small book clubs where you do one book at a time. And it's a very specific, like we're going to do one book for a specific time period on a specific night and do it that way. I think there's a lot of flexibility as to how you could be a woman who starts to learn how to use her mind. I think there's other ways of doing it. It just so happened that for us, this has ended up working.
That's a beautiful thing. So your mini crisis is over?
Oh, absolutely.
How long did that take?
It was only a few months. I got over it when I spoke to a man who was in his 40s. I brought it up to him. It was one of the pastors of our church. And he said to me, I've waited my entire life to be in my 40s. And I said, what? I probably had that look on your face, like, you know what I mean? That I couldn't fix my face fast enough when he said it. I was thinking, what on earth are you talking about? And he said, I feel like all of my giftings that I'm actually finally able to use, that I'm actually hitting my stride as a person. And I thought, wait a minute. Nobody told me that. I had never considered that before. I started saying, okay, Lord, well, if I'm supposed to love you with all my heart, with all my strength, which I've been wrestling through for the past 2 decades as an adult, through all the trials that we've gone through as a family. Now I know I was given a mind. How do I use my mind and my giftedness to serve you well? How do I do that now? And how do I train my mind to use it well? And so once I had that picture in my head that I could run now, I could run differently. I had freedom. I was given a freedom then that I didn't have until he said that. That was just the kindness of God.
Reading these books and doing it with your friend, how has this benefited you, your life, your children, your husband? What's been the overflow of this?
So in light of what I had just said, there's been some very specific benefits to me. These are those weird sort of side benefits that I have seen as a result. But one of them is that reading all of these books has granted me a voice. Here's the reason why I say that. The first time you read Pride and Prejudice, you find out that people can speak in a way that you can't think. Like, I'm almost thinking in emojis. And then all of a sudden you read this and there is such a complexity of thought. It actually gives you the ability to take your feelings and your life experiences. And all of a sudden, it gives you a voice to be able to express what's going on in your own mind and your own heart, which you didn't have before because you didn't have the words. You didn't have the ability because it wasn't there. This is the reason why Charlotte Mason talks about spreading a feast before your children. This is the reason why you don't ask a child to write a paper out of a void because there's nothing there. Well, that goes the same thing for us. I ended up, since I had that me slamming my way into my 40s, stumbling and falling into it, I had started a book. I published a book. It's called A Happy Mother of Children, Disciplines of Happiness. I had wrestled from the time I had Wesley at 20 years old. I wrestled with this idea of how am I a happy mother of children? There's a scripture that says, the barren woman shall dance as a happy mother of children. Well, what if your entire life is hard and you don't know how to be happy? What if that? So I ended up writing a book and I got it published. I have written articles that I've gotten published by Classical Academic Press. I got published by Circe a few times. I started learning Spanish. I had an opportunity to go on mission trips. My husband gave me the freedom. I've been to Mexico 3 times. I keep going to the same place. I wanted to learn Spanish as a way of healing the brokenness that came as a result of the fall, and as a result of the Tower of Babel and what happened in Babel. And learning another language is a way of healing brokenness between cultures. And it sounds cool. So there's also that. And so practically, reading has given me the confidence and a way of thinking so that I can speak and I can know better who God is and how the world works. Now, when I asked Jill, thank God, right, for the body of Christ. And not all of us are the same. And that's a beautiful thing. And it's wonderful. So when she and I were hashing it out, I said, Jill, why are we doing this? And it was really cute. And she said, I don't know how much I remember, but it doesn't diminish it for me. And which is true, which is funny because I was thinking we don't remember all of our meals, but it doesn't change the fact that it nourishes us. And we don't remember all of
such a good point.
Yes.
And we don't remember all of the sermons that we hear on Sunday, but they're all part of our sanctification process. They're part of the building and the structure of the human mind and heart. And all of the books that we read that are full of truth are the building blocks of a human soul. So some of the things we talked about, one of them is this sense of accomplishment. I have some philosophical reasons, but one of them is just that you end up doing something really hard intellectually. We as moms are doing hard things all the time, trying to figure out the logistics of my large family and getting children to their sporting events on time with all their stuff. That's a logistical stuff. I mean, that is something else. And I'm really proud of myself. But when I finished Herodotus, I really thought I should have thrown a party. I should have had I finished a Herodotus party.
You should have.
And I can say I almost liked it. Almost. I was really close. I learned some things. I was just reading yesterday about the idea of there's a dopamine response when you do something really difficult intellectually. It's not just physical. We all talk about the fact that we should go jogging, go running, go learn something physical. And that's 100% true. Literally, go outside, go jog. But right now we're talking about your brain. When you do something hard with your mind, it does affect you emotionally. It changes how you feel about yourself that you've done something hard. Another thing is, there's this idea of being part of the great conversation. We're reading things and it's referencing a book. Well, when we first started, it would reference books. I'd never even heard of any of the books. Well, then all of a sudden we keep reading. And not only have I heard of the book, but some of them I've read them.
Yep.
And the connectedness of our world starts becoming more clear to me. And I didn't understand about the fracturedness of my education until I started studying and started learning under, I've listened to a whole bunch of Andrew Kern and Dr. Perrin. And all of a sudden I started learning about, the way I was educated. It was in these chunks of facts that, you study them and then you regurgitate them out and they have no connectedness to each other, except that we know from the word of God that is actually not how God's made the world. If the primary source, if our first source is Jesus Christ, and from whom all other things have come, then every single solitary truth all points to Christ, which means every single thing that we study is connected to everything else. And so as Jill and I, and this is one thing that has in one sense made all the difference. Jill gets the idea from the very beginning that we're not just going to read Susan Wise Bauer's list. We're not just going to address the intellectual. We're also going to read an education book about, how do we teach our kids, how to think. And we're also going to read some kind of philosophy, theology book at the same time. The thing that ends up happening as a result is the education books explain how do you get knowledge and how do you get knowledge into the soul? How do you take theology and get it past the brain into a person's heart? There was some kind of weird thing, and we would be sitting talking about one book, and all of a sudden I would say, oh my gosh, that's exactly what they were talking about in the other book that we were reading. And we would be sitting there with all the books open in front of us. The reason why that's possible is because of the ultimate truth of who Jesus is. Because if you're reading books that are true, when you're reading classics, you're reading what's true. They're telling the truth about the ages. When you're reading what's true, all of those things are speaking to each other. They're all speaking about how our God reveals himself in this world. So how does God reveal himself, and how does he reveal his principles in war? We started reading Thucydides, and I was like, so daggone long that there are books. There's not chapters in this thing. There's books in the book. That's a warning sign, by the way. So I'm like 3 books in, and I literally had to stop and Google. This is what I Googled. Why should I read Thucydides? I'm like, somebody please give me a reason. What I didn't know, which is why you have to go learn from people who know more than you, is Thucydides explains what happens to a culture when they get greedy and it destroys them. Well, I didn't know that. I'm so bogged down in who took how many pop lights in triemes to wherever. I don't even know what I'm doing anymore. I don't even know what I'm reading about. The article that I read pulled me out of that to say, do you want to understand about war and about cultures and about governments that are greedy and start taking over other places and how it will destroy them and how it destroys the moral fiber of their people? Do you want to see what it looks like? Well, that's what this book is about. Well, I didn't know that. I do now. So do you want to see how Jesus's principles play out in government and culture and in war? Well, you read Thucydides and now you know. Do you want to see how marriage looks, good marriage and a bad marriage? Go read Anna Karenina. Do you want to see the contrast of the two? Do you want to understand what sin does to the human heart? Go read Crime and Punishment and watch the insanity of sin. And why is it long? Because life is. I mean, seriously, it is. Our modern books, in one sense, some of their shortness lies. It lies. Anna Karenina about marriage, that book is long because so is life. Because you can't explain the reality of marriage in a short book. You ask any woman in her 40s about marriage, and she's going to tell you it's long. Whether it's good or bad, it's long. Anna Karenina tells the truth. So we read the classics because they have endured, because they're true. And so a woman who chooses, even if it's just one, to step out of her time and she reads, she, number one, gets to see the fact that the realities of the word, the principles that are in the word, they are for all time. They're not just for now. All of our modern day Christian books, as beautiful as they are, and they may all be true, one of the failings of them is that they were written now. And then you start forgetting about the fact that our God is eternal. I literally had a week with my children. It was one thing after another. I have got to tell you, I think I've spent 5 days out of the last 7 crying.
Oh,
it was literally like, I don't even want to count how many children it was. It wasn't even like 1 or 2 kids. It was one thing after another. You know what gave me hope and heart about that? Mother Monica in Confessions over 1,500 years ago, whose son left her in the temple because he didn't feel like dealing with his mom, and he rolled out and left her. He's like, hey, Mom, I'm going to go check out when that boat's coming. And then they fell asleep, and then he hopped on the boat that was leaving in the middle of the night and left his mother. You think kid problems are new? And all of a sudden, when you hear that, you say, wait a minute, Jesus, wait a minute. Your truth is for all time. It's for all time. The benefits of a person who is educating themselves by pulling out of our time and seeing the hand of God moving over centuries and over cultures. I mean, one of the things Jill said, so Jill and I come from different places. I am in a biracial family. I'm married to a Black man. Our perspectives and how we've engaged with some of these books is very different. Like, I don't know, we had to read Uncle Tom's Cabin. I made it in the very beginning of Uncle Tom's Cabin, had a complete and total meltdown. In the very beginning, he decides he thinks he's going to sell the one boy. Except when he describes the one boy, it sounds like he literally is describing one of my sons. And I can't, I literally can't read it. I'm hysterical. I can't read this book. My children were descendant from enslaved peoples in the Carolinas. And I literally can't read it. I end up having to go talk to my husband. Like, I can't read this book. We talked it through. I end up reading it and I survived. So just because of trying to navigating that, right? And my heart for my children in the past and my sorrow for the sins of humankind and so forth and my family's past. And Jill said one of the things that she learned from reading these books is a heart of compassion for other people. She hasn't gotten past reading Native Son. She would have never read Native Son. Native Son, she said, Karen, I walked in his shoes when I read that. And she said, I totally changed how I saw things and how I saw other people when I read that. I wouldn't have known. I just didn't know. And now I see differently. That idea of standing inside of somebody else's shoes. One other thought, just because I know that we don't have all day. Just forgive me.
I feel like I wish we did have all day.
Yeah. The other thing is that I feel like reading has granted me a sense of wonder. Reading books from people who know more than you do has given eyes to see the world in a way that you couldn't have seen it. And that has shown the world to be more beautiful than I thought. And that sense of wonder is imparted to your children. I have the joy of being able to share with them and talk to them. I have the example of saying, Mom's a lifelong learner also alongside of you. My son, we went to a lacrosse tournament and one of my grown sons doesn't live at home, came to the lacrosse tournament. We both sat down together. Game didn't start for an hour. We both pulled out a book. We both had Chesterton's Orthodoxy and we busted out laughing.
Oh, wow.
Because we both had the same book and we had a rough road all of his years, but we ended up connecting over Moby Dick. It's the only book he ever loved until he graduated and was like 5 years out of school. Out of my homeschool that he hated every minute of it, except for the time that we read Moby Dick. And that's how we connected. As far as my children setting an example and instilling a sense of wonder. And then lastly, how it's affected other people. I started going around, I started reading books. So I started going to the men at church. I remember sitting there was a group of men that I know. And I walked up to them and said, have any of you ever read Orthodoxy? Because I can't get past, I keep reading it over and over again. And they said, no.
So good. Yeah.
Well, I found out just recently they have a book club and they read Orthodoxy and they smoke cigars and drink bourbon.
That's awesome.
And they didn't invite me. I think it's a man club. My thoughts for a mom, depending on what season she's in, is the most important thing is that everything that we actually need to know about how this world works is in the Word of God. So at the very, very least, you study the word and you find other women with whom you can talk. You got to be able to talk about it though. You have to be able to hash it out, whether that's, go into a Bible study or on the phone or your husband, you have to be able to hash it out because we're meant for community and hashing it out. And then listening outside of your world, not just today's books. Don't just read all the good Christian books of today and the Christian doctrine books and educational books, because we all have the same blind spots because we all live here, but reading outside of our time and then being okay with whatever season that you're in. If this is the season that right now, the only books you can read are children's classics that you read with your kids, and then you go get the read aloud revival book and that you ask the questions of your kids and you hash it out with them. And then maybe you go to a book club every single summer because you have a little bit of time in the summer and you read at a book club and you talk with the ladies at the book club. Be okay with that season because one day you'll be in your 40s and maybe you'll have a little bit of time to read all these books.
Karen, you just dropped a wealth of points on us. And as much as Misty doesn't like synopsis, I'm just going to go through some of the things that really stuck out to me because
Misty's not here.
Because Misty's not here. But just because I think what some of the real key principles that you said, and you did such a great job illustrating those points, I just want to go back over those just for a minute. So I loved how you said that making decisions ahead of time was so important and how you need to choose someone with better taste than yourself. And I think that that's so important. Exposure breeds taste, as Brandy it does say to us. And finding someone who is trustworthy to point us in a right direction just eliminates a lot of decision. And I think decision fatigue is a real thing. And so just having a list to go by is great. And I loved how you talked about having the accountability and the flexibility that fosters that community. And it can be with just one person. In fact, that might be a really great thing. Sometimes I think so many people get caught up in thinking like, we just need to have this big dynamic book club because then it's just more lively. But it sounds like it can be very lively with just one other person who you can hash those things out with. I really appreciated that. And then I love the strict economy of time, honoring one another with keeping the main thing, talking about those books. And it can get so sidetracked so quickly in big groups. A small group that can stay focused is quite a lovely idea. And that you set goals, but you have so much grace to deal with seasons and life and the realities that come up. Goals are great, but if you're not meeting them, it's not a failure, it's an adjustment. I think those are such important points to remember. And then your benefits. I loved how you said you didn't know what benefits you had when you were, or there was no benefit when you started, but how reading helped you build confidence. And I think so many homeschool moms feel so anxious and a lack of confidence when teaching their older kids, not being confident that they can do this. What you were saying about reading is that building of confidence, that you can do it yourself. Other than finding somebody to have a good book list and somebody to discuss with, this is something that any mom anywhere can do themselves. And with any amount of children, it sounds like. So I think that is such an encouraging word. The other ones that it brings you compassion, eyes to see truth, beauty, and goodness, right? That wonder that you're instilling, which is such a thing when we can be, having some really tough days, right? To still have that hope and that future and modeling for our children and connecting with people, not just our book club friends, but our children, our husbands, our church members, right? Like members of the body of Christ. Like this is all of these benefits that have nothing to do with checking off lists on the 100 classics you should read. I just think that is something that, is missing, is so many like, well, you're a well-educated person if you've read all these books, but none of these benefits that you listed were about box checking.
Yeah.
It sounds like so many of the things that happened to you in your life and the things that have come up, you were able to handle them differently because you were thinking differently. And I think that is such an important thing to remember for our intellectual lives. Loving God with our whole minds, even finding truth in pagan books.
Yeah.
But also, I loved how you have other theology and other education books alongside that so that you're deeply rooted in God's word and his truth, and then finding the truth that is in these books that maybe, some people won't even touch because they are not Christian. And therefore finding those principles, those truths. So I so appreciate what you and your friend Jill are trying to do and sharing that with us.
The thing that wasn't on Abby's list that I really appreciated was the advice you gave to younger moms about basically accepting the stage of life that we're in. I'm in my 40s now too, by the way. I feel like I wasted a lot of time kind of raging against the stage I was in when it came to my own intellectual life and reading. I was constantly frustrated about the limits that life placed on me when I was a younger mom. instead of just embracing it with grace. It took me a long time to get to that place where I could just accept that this is what God has for me today. And that's good enough because it was his plan, and that should be good enough with me. This morning during Bible time with my kids, we're reading through, what is it? John Calvin's little book on the Christian life, I think it's called. It's just it really is a little book.
Mm-hmm.
My 12-year-old asked me about peace. Calvin has this section where he talks about peace. And really what he's talking about is peace versus discontent. And I feel like what you said about that, you were so echoing him. And I don't even know if you've read that little book.
I have not.
It is truly a little book. This is actually, I think, my first Calvin. I think I've only read excerpts before. Anyway, he talks about that and this idea that accepting what God gives to us, doing that with peace involves not raging against him every time it's not what we thought was the best idea. And that's what I was hearing from you, was this acceptance, basically work within our means, right? We do that financially, right? I can't have a fancy vacation going to such and such. I have to be okay with that or I'll have a very discontent life. But somehow I didn't connect that to my intellectual life. I was constantly discontent and frustrated. So I love your encouragement to embrace it, keep the most important thing during those times. And it's just such good advice, Karen. It really is.
Thank you.
If you can choose, I know this is like kids asking you who's your favorite child, but what are some of your top 3 books, and maybe the hardest books or the most worthy books? I don't know. I just would really love a couple actual recommendations from Karen.
Yeah.
So I loved Orthodoxy. Chesterton shows you that this entire life, everything about this world points to Jesus, and he never talks about the Bible. And it's so brilliant that I couldn't wrap my mind around it. It totally changed how I found Jesus in the world. My background is we're so steeped in the word that it was wild to find him everywhere. And I thought that was crazy. And I love it because he's there. This is so funny because other people have read it and are like, I just don't really love this book. I really, really appreciate the book, The Intellectual Life.
Oh, me too.
Well, we're in a big fan club here.
Oh my gosh.
Love The Intellectual.
Is it Sir Talanges? I can't even say his name.
Launch.
So, yeah, we just kind of trail off at the end and figure that's good enough.
So we sound French or something. Is that how?
Yes.
Sound fancy.
We figure if you cut off half the word, it sounds French.
Yeah, that makes us sound fancy. I feel like it kind of practically gave me a way of thinking about thinking. And I think that was also one of the first places I started learning about that all things point to Christ. I heard the idea of that from Andrew Kern, but that was the first time I had really read that everywhere I looked, even amongst the pagans who had the beginnings of truth, it was only in theology that we find the true fruition of truth. But the intellectual life gave me the beginnings of all of that. And also kind of practically, how do you live? Now, he says in there that you should study 2 hours a day, which I thought was, you're like, seriously, guy? I mean, what does your life look like? Come on now.
He didn't have kids. That's the thing.
Yeah. This is going to be funny. Do you know what I really loved? This is so interesting to me. I'm thinking to myself, I don't even know who you are anymore. So on her list, we have to read the Greek lyrics. And I did the translation by Richard Lattimore. And for some reason, I got the biggest kick out of these little poems in there. And my favorite one is Archilochus, who, by the way, they say, wrote a bunch of beast fables, apparently of this sort, later assembled under the name of Aesop.
Oh, wow.
Oh.
So I started reading. I'm thinking, man, I love this guy. And I didn't read who he was. And I went back. I'm thinking, who is this guy who wrote all these little poems that I like so much? Oh my gosh, look who it is. I wrote all over it. I think maybe because I got such a kick out of the fact it was short. I don't know. Probably, maybe that's it. But I did really appreciate, though it was kind of hard, the Iliad, the Odyssey, and the Aeneid. Part of it, especially the Odyssey, the idea of being on a journey. The journey idea to me is very Christian. You know, the feeling of, because our life is very much a journey until we get to heaven and we're finished. And Augustine talks a lot about being on a journey. And so that idea of being on a journey and all the things that happen and that longing of the heart to go home, that just really resonated with me.
It's a great list.
Yes. And 2 of them are short, right?
Really.
Orthodoxy short.
Yeah, they are.
Thank you both for coming, Karen. This was truly amazing. I mean, I had pretty high expectations, but you blew me out of the water. It just was so good.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
That's it for today. Thank you so much for listening and being a part of the sisterhood of the podcast. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss our upcoming episodes. You are going to love this season. All of the books and things mentioned in today's episode are linked in our show notes. Just go to scholésisters.com/SS93 to check it out. Remember, our fall retreat is all about memory. Will we cover ideas about memory work? Yes. Will we cover the topic of memory far beyond those narrow bounds? Also, yes. Head on over to scholésisters.com/memory, register, and prepare to think about memory like never before. In our next episode, we're talking to Betsy Farquhar from Redeemed Reader about restful learning in regard to crafts and handwork. Betsy's 2021 cooking challenge is inspiring us beyond the kitchen into many aspects of life. You'll definitely be inspired too. Until then, we want to remind you once again that homeschooling is a marathon you needn't run alone, so open up your eyes and look around you. Find your sisters.
So this might be a good time to tell you that Abby has
Finally
crawled
showed up
into the room.
Hi, Abby.
Hello, Karen. I apologize. I was in the wrong Zoom room.
Oh,
Well, it was nice of you to show up, Abby.
Yeah, I know. Brandy, you can fire me later.